The sky above Kethera burned red. Ambassador Shiran stood at the council chamber window, her crystalline skin reflecting the terrible light like 1,000 broken mirrors. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the vibrations of distant explosions through her fingertips. The Vorlax had arrived 3 days ago, and already her world was dying. Behind her, the council argued in desperate harmonics, their voices creating discordant frequencies that hurt to hear. They had sent messages to every allied world in the Galactic Coalition. 17 species had received their pleas for help. 17 species had refused. The Genkar say it is too dangerous, Council Leader Murtok announced, his voice trembling with fear and anger. The Kikstal claim we are not strategically valuable. The Talani expressed their condolences and wished us peace in our final days. He slammed his hand on the crystal table, creating a sharp, bitter note. They wish us peace while we burn. Shiran watched another city fall on the horizon. The Vorlax swarm moved like a living shadow across the land, consuming everything in its path. They were not conquerors who wanted territory. They were parasites who ate entire worlds and left nothing behind but empty husks floating in space. 43 civilizations had fallen to them in the past century. Now it was Kethara's turn, and the galaxy was content to watch from a safe distance. How many are dead? Shiran asked quietly. 3 million, replied Murtok. And that number grows every hour. Shiran closed her eyes. 3 million souls, each one a unique harmonic in the great song of her people. All those voices silenced forever. She thought of her daughter, evacuated to the southern continent where the swarm had not yet reached. How many days did they have left? A week less? We have one more response, said Communications Officer Ralvin, his young voice hesitant. It is from a species I do not recognize. They call themselves humans. Humans? Murtok's confusion was evident. I have never heard of them. They are new to the galactic community, Ralvin explained, pulling up data on the main display. First contact was only 3 years ago. They come from a planet called Earth in a remote sector. The Coalition classifies them as a developing species. Their technology is considered primitive by galactic standards. Then why waste our time? Another council member snapped. If the advanced species will not help us, what can primitives do? They say they are coming, Ralvin said simply. One ship, a frigate called the Perseverance. They received our distress call and they are coming to help. The council chamber fell silent. Even in their desperation, the absurdity of the situation struck them. One primitive ship against the Vorlax swarm? It was not help. It was suicide. Tell them not to come, Murtok ordered. Tell them we are grateful, but they will only die here. There is no point in adding their deaths to ours. I already did, Ralvin admitted. Their captain sent a reply. She said, and I quote, "We're coming anyway." Hold on. Shiran felt something stir in her chest. It was not hope exactly. Hope had died when the 17th refusal arrived. But it was something. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had decided that Cathari lives were worth risking their own for, even if it was futile. 2 days later, the human ship arrived. Shiran watched from the command center as the small vessel dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of their system. On the display screens, it looked impossibly tiny compared to the Vorlax fleet that surrounded Cathara. The swarm had 50 capital ships, each the size of a small moon, and hundreds of smaller bio-vessels that spread across space like an infection. The human frigate was barely larger than a civilian transport. This is madness, Murtok whispered beside her. They cannot possibly survive. The human ship moved deeper into the system, accelerating toward the planet. Shiran expected the Vorlax to intercept them immediately, to swarm over the tiny vessel and tear it apart. But the swarm ignored them. To the hive mind that controlled the Vorlax, the human ship was too insignificant to bother with. It was like an insect flying toward a raging fire. We are receiving a transmission from the human vessel, Ralvin announced. Put it through, Shiran ordered. The face that appeared on the screen was unlike anything Shiran had seen before. The human was female, with dark skin and eyes that held a hardness that spoke of experience and determination. She wore a military uniform and her jaw was set in a way that suggested she had made a decision and would not be swayed from it. This is Captain Maria Chen of Earth Ship Perseverance, the human said. Her voice was rough, direct, lacking the diplomatic formalities that usually filled such communications. We received your distress call. We know the coalition didn't respond. We know you've been abandoned. But Earth remembers what that feels like, and we won't let it happen to you. We're here to help. Captain Chen, Shirin managed to say, her voice translator converting her harmonics into words the human could understand. We are grateful beyond measure, but you must understand the situation. The Vorlax swarm is too powerful. Even the Coalition's combined fleets avoid direct confrontation with them. Your single ship cannot make a difference. You will only die here with us. Captain Chen's expression did not change. Maybe, she said, but we're not leaving. My great-grandmother used to tell me a story about Earth's history. During one of our wars, there was a battle where a few hundred soldiers held a mountain pass against an army of thousands. They knew they couldn't win. They knew they were going to die. But they fought anyway, because someone had to, and because every hour they bought gave civilians time to evacuate. She leaned forward slightly. We're buying you time, Ambassador. What you do with it is up to you. The transmission ended. Sharon stared at the blank screen, processing what she had just heard. The humans knew this was a suicide mission. They knew they could not win. And they came anyway. The human ship is taking up position, Ralvin reported. They are moving toward the outer swarm formations. Captain, they are preparing to engage. One ship, Murtok said, his voice hollow. One ship against the entire swarm. Shirin watched the tactical display as the small human frigate accelerated toward the nearest Vorlax bioships. Weapons systems powered up. The humans were not running. They were not hiding. They were attacking. All military forces, Shirin found herself saying, her voice stronger than she expected. Captain Chen is right. They are buying us time. Coordinate with the human vessel. Give them whatever support we can, and prepare to evacuate every civilian from the Northern Hemisphere. She turned to face the Council. If these humans believe our lives are worth fighting for, then we owe it to them to survive. We owe it to them to make their sacrifice mean something. For the first time in days, Shirin saw something other than despair in the eyes of her people. It was the faintest spark of defiance. One primitive species with one small ship had done what 17 advanced civilizations could not. They had reminded the Cathari that they were worth saving. The battle for Cathara had begun. And against all logic and reason, the Cathari started to believe they might survive it. Captain Maria Chen gripped the arms of her command chair as the Perseverance shuddered under enemy fire. The bridge lights flickered, and somewhere in the lower decks, damage control teams were shouting about hull breaches. She kept her eyes on the tactical display, watching the patterns of the Vorlax swarm with the intensity of a chess player studying her opponent. Direct hit on our port side, Lieutenant Commander James Park reported from the engineering station. Shields are down to 40%. We cannot take many more of those. We don't need to take more hits, Maria replied calmly. We need to not be where they're shooting. Helm, execute pattern Delta 7. The Perseverance rolled and dove, slipping between two massive Vorlax bioships like a minnow swimming past whales. The enemy vessels tried to track the small human frigate, but they were too slow, too used to fighting opponents who followed conventional battle tactics. Humans did not fight conventionally. Target their supply lines, Maria ordered. Those bioships carrying harvested resources back to the main hive vessels. I want them gone. Weapons Officer Yuki Tanaka grinned as she locked targeting solutions. Firing railguns. Missiles away. The Perseverance's weapons were not the most advanced in the galaxy. Human technology lagged decades behind Coalition standards. But what they lacked in sophistication they made up for in raw destructive power. The railgun rounds moved at a significant fraction of light speed, punching through the organic hulls of Vorlax supply ships like bullets through flesh. Nuclear-tipped missiles followed, their warheads carefully calibrated for maximum damage. The Vorlax swarm finally noticed them. 3 hunter-killer bioships peeled away from the main formation, accelerating toward the Perseverance with frightening speed. They were fast, adaptive, and designed to overwhelm prey with superior numbers. In any normal engagement, the human ship would have been destroyed in minutes. But Maria Chen had spent her entire military career studying asymmetric warfare. She had read every historical text about guerrilla tactics, from ancient Earth conflicts to modern insurgencies. The lesson was always the same. When you are weaker than your enemy, you do not fight their battle. You make them fight yours. Lead them into the debris field from the supply ships we just destroyed, Maria commanded. Full speed. Make them chase us. The Perseverance dove into the expanding cloud of wreckage. weaving between chunks of destroyed bioships and frozen organic matter. The Vorlax hunters followed, their hive mind confident in their ability to run down this primitive vessel. They did not see the trap until it was too late. "Detonating proximity mines," Tanaka announced cheerfully. Now, the debris field exploded. Dozens of small human mines, disguised as wreckage and scattered during their initial attack, erupted simultaneously. The Vorlax hunter-killers flew directly into the kill zone. 2 were destroyed instantly. The third emerged damaged and disoriented, only to find the Perseverance waiting with weapons charged. "Fire everything," Maria ordered. The wounded Vorlax ship did not survive. On Cathara's surface, Ambassador Sheeran watched the engagement through long-range sensors, hardly believing what she was seeing. The human ship should have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes of combat. Instead, it was winning, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through cunning and a willingness to take risks that bordered on insanity. "They fight like nothing I have ever seen," Murtok said beside her, his voice filled with wonder. "They use our enemy's strength against them. They turn every disadvantage into a weapon. They fight like prey that learn to bite back," Sheeran replied quietly. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Coalition was watching too. In the Kixtal war rooms, admirals studied the human tactics with professional interest. In the Genkar diplomatic centers, officials whispered about the dangerous newcomers who did not understand when to retreat. On the Talani homeworld, young people gathered around public displays, cheering for the primitive species that refused to abandon a dying world. Admiral Croven of the Kixtal watched the battlefields with growing respect. The Kixtal were a warrior culture, and they recognized courage when they saw it. More importantly, they recognized tactical brilliance. The humans were not simply brave. They were smart, adaptable, and utterly ruthless when necessary. "They fight with honor," Croven said to his second-in-command. "But more than that, they fight with purpose. They know they are outmatched, yet they do not hesitate." "Should we assist them?" his officer asked. Croven was quiet for a moment. Coalition protocols forbade intervention in Vorlax engagements unless a member world was directly threatened. But protocols could be interpreted flexibly by those with the will to do so. "Not yet," he decided, "but prepare the fleet. If these humans continue to fight as they have, they will need reinforcements. And I would be honored to fight beside a species with such spirit." Back at Cathara, the Perseverance was in trouble. The Vorlax hive mind had recategorized the human ship from insignificant to nuisance, and was directing more resources to eliminate it. 12 bioships were converging on the human frigate's position, too many to evade or outmaneuver. "We've got company," Park reported, his voice tight with tension. "Multiple targets incoming. Shields are almost gone, and we have fires on 3 decks. Maria studied the tactical display, her mind racing through options. They could run. They could try to lose their pursuers in Cathara's upper atmosphere. They could call for evacuation. But all of those options meant abandoning the Cathari to their fate. Unacceptable. "Send a message on all frequencies," Maria ordered. "I don't care who hears it. Tell them Captain Maria Chen of Earth needs help. Tell them we are not leaving these people to die. And tell them that reinforcements are coming." Tanaka looked at her captain with confusion. "Captain, we don't have any reinforcements. Earth Command doesn't even know we are here yet." Maria smiled grimly. "The Vorlax don't know that, and neither does the Coalition. Sometimes, Lieutenant, the best weapon is making your enemy believe you are stronger than you are." She opened a channel to the incoming Vorlax vessels. The hive mind would receive it, would process it, would make calculations based on the information provided. "This is Captain Chen of the Perseverance. You have made a mistake coming to this world. You have made a bigger mistake attacking it while humans are here. Our reinforcements will arrive soon, and when they do, you will learn why Earth is classified as a death world. You will learn why humanity does not run from fights. Last chance to retreat before we make you regret this." It was a complete bluff, but Maria had learned long ago that confidence could be as effective as actual firepower. The Vorlax swarm hesitated, their hive mind processing this new information, calculating threat levels and risk assessments. That hesitation bought 3 more minutes. 3 minutes for Cathari civilians to evacuate. 3 minutes for hope to survive a little longer. And then, impossibly, something changed. 3 new contacts appeared on the edge of the system, dropping out of faster-than-light travel. They were not military vessels. The sensor readings showed a cargo hauler, a mining ship, and what appeared to be a colony transport. But they were broadcasting human identification codes. Park stared at his console in disbelief. "Captain, we have incoming vessels. They are human. I repeat, we have human reinforcements." Maria felt her heart leap in her chest. She had been bluffing, but apparently, someone had called her bluff and decided to make it real. She pulled up the communication frequencies and heard voices shouting over each other. Civilian captains and volunteer crews who had heard the distress call and decided to help. "This is Commander Jackson Lee of the mining vessel Iron Harvest. We heard you needed a hand, Perseverance. We don't have much in the way of weapons, but we have industrial lasers and a lot of stubbornness. Colony Transport hopes dawn here. We've got 300 civilians on board, but we also rigged up some missile launchers. Not pretty, but they shoot." Cargo hauler Second Chance reporting. "We normally transport grain, but grain containers make decent kinetic weapons if you throw them fast enough." Maria felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no time for emotion. There was only time to fight. "All vessels, this is Captain Chen. Welcome to the party. Let's show these things why you do not mess with humanity." The makeshift human fleet charged forward, a collection of civilian ships held together with desperation and hope. They should not have stood a chance. By every military calculation, they were already dead. But humanity had never been good at accepting what should be. The mining ship Iron Harvest did not look like a warship. Its hull was scarred from years of asteroid work, and its industrial lasers were designed to cut through rock, not enemy vessels. But Commander Jackson Lee had grown up on the mining colonies of the outer solar system, where making do with what you had was not just a skill, but a way of life. "Target those bioships clustering around the Perseverance," Jackson ordered his small crew. "Cut them apart the same way we cut asteroids. Precision over power." The Iron Harvest lasers were not as flashy as military weapons, but they were incredibly focused. Where a warship's energy beams might spread over a target area, the mining lasers cut like surgical scalpels. They sliced through the organic armor of Vorlax vessels with disturbing efficiency, opening hulls to vacuum and disrupting the bio-neural networks that connected each ship to the hive mind. The colony transport Hope's Dawn fought with equal creativity. Captain Sarah Okonkwo had evacuated 300 civilians from a failing colony 2 years ago, and her ship still carried the improvised defenses they had rigged up during that desperate flight. Now those missile launchers, built from spare parts and determination, launched salvo after salvo at Vorlax targets. "We are not soldiers," Sarah told her crew over the internal communications. "We are farmers, teachers, engineers, people who wanted a quiet life among the stars. But quiet lives only exist because someone is willing to fight for them. Today we fight." The cargo hauler Second Chance took the concept of improvised warfare to an extreme. Captain Wei Chen had loaded his cargo bays with containers of grain, bound for a colony world. Now he used his ship's powerful cargo catapult to launch those containers at relativistic speeds toward Vorlax vessels. Each container massed several tons, and at near-light velocity, they hit with the force of nuclear weapons. Who needs fancy missiles when you have momentum and mass? We laughed over the communication channel as another container struck home, tearing through a Vorlax bioship. Basic physics, people. It works every time. The makeshift human fleet should not have worked. Their tactics violated every rule of engagement the Galactic Coalition had established over millennia. They used weapons that were never designed for combat. They fought with a level of creativity and chaos that made military strategists watching from Coalition worlds shake their heads in disbelief. But they were winning. Slowly, painfully, with casualties mounting, they were actually winning. On Kethara's surface, the battle was equally desperate. A squad of human Marines had landed to help evacuate civilians from cities in the swarm's path. Sergeant Ana Rodriguez led her team through the ruins of the capital city, where Vorlax ground forces were consuming everything in their path. Ana had never seen anything like the Vorlax up close. They were not individuals, but extensions of the hive mind, bioengineered creatures that moved with disturbing coordination. They looked like insects crossed with nightmares, all chitinous armor and razor-sharp limbs, and there were thousands of them. "Grenades!" Ana shouted, pulling the pin and throwing the explosive into a cluster of advancing Vorlax. The detonation scattered them, buying precious seconds for a group of Cathari civilians to flee down the street behind her. Private Marcus Webb provided covering fire with his rifle, the kinetic rounds punching through Vorlax carapaces. "Sarge, we've got more coming from the east. Maybe 100 of them." Then we hold this intersection for another 5 minutes, Anna replied, reloading her weapon with practiced efficiency. That is how long those civilians need to reach the evacuation point. A young Cathari male, barely old enough to be considered an adult, approached Anna cautiously. His name was Kelvin, and he was supposed to have evacuated an hour ago. Instead, he had stayed behind to help others escape. Now he looked at the advancing Vorlax with crystalline eyes that reflected pure terror. "How do you fight them?" Kelvin asked, his voice translator struggling with his panicked harmonics. "They do not fear. They do not stop. How do you stand against something like that?" Anna checked her ammunition count and smiled at the young alien. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen hell and decided to walk through it anyway. "You fight them by being more stubborn than they are," she said simply. "Your people are peaceful. That is beautiful. But sometimes peace only survives because someone is willing to do violence to protect it. Today that is us. Tomorrow maybe it will be you," the Vorlax charged. Anna and her team met them with gunfire and grenades, fighting with the desperate ferocity of soldiers who knew they were the only thing standing between innocent lives and certain death. Kelvin watched in awe and horror as these aliens from a distant world shed blood for people they had never met before. When the fighting finally subsided, when the last of the civilians had reached safety, Kelvin found Anna sitting against a ruined wall, binding a wound on her leg. 3 of her Marines were injured. 1 was dead, but they had held the line. "I do not understand you," Kelvin said quietly. "The galaxy abandoned us. You owe us nothing. Why die for strangers?" Anna looked up at him, and in her eyes, Kelvin saw something that would stay with him forever. He saw the memory of pain, of loss, of a species that knew what it meant to suffer alone. "Because someone should have come for us once," Anna said softly. "A long time ago, Earth nearly destroyed itself. We fought wars that killed millions. We poisoned our own planet. We stood on the edge of extinction, and the stars were silent because we were alone in the universe. We survived because we learned to help each other, to be better than our worst impulses." She stood up, wincing at the pain in her leg. "We remember what it is like when the world burns and nobody comes to save you. Never again. Not on our watch." In orbit, the battle reached a critical point. The Vorlax hive mind had finally recognized humanity as a legitimate threat. 80% of the swarm's forces redirected toward the human vessels, abandoning the planetary assault to eliminate these troublesome newcomers. "Captain, we are in trouble," Lieutenant Park reported to Maria Chen. The Perseverance was barely holding together. Life support was failing. Half the weapon systems were offline. Casualties across the human fleet were mounting rapidly. Maria looked at the tactical display, watching the overwhelming force of the Vorlax swarm converging on their position. They had bought time. They had saved lives, but they were out of miracles. "All ships, prepare to fall back to defensive positions around Cathara," Maria ordered. "We make our stand at the planet. If we are going to die, we die protecting what we came here to save." "Captain," Tanaka interrupted, her voice urgent. "We are receiving multiple new contacts. Ships dropping out of FTL all around the system." Maria felt her heart sink. More Vorlax reinforcements. This was the end. But then Park laughed, a sound of pure disbelief and joy. "Captain, they are not Vorlax. They are coalition vessels. The Kixtal fleet just arrived, and they are broadcasting on all frequencies. Admiral Croven says, and I quote, 'We came to witness human courage. Now we fight beside it.' More ships appeared on the sensors. Not the full coalition armada, but individual vessels from a dozen different species. Rogue captains, idealists, young officers who had watched the humans stand and decided that some things were more important than following orders." The tide of battle shifted. The Vorlax swarm, faced with organized resistance from multiple species, began to falter. For the first time in the engagement, the hive mind calculated that victory was no longer assured. For the first time, the Vorlax considered retreat, but they had one final weapon, one last attempt to salvage the situation. Deep within the largest hive ship, a doomsday device activated. It was a planet cracker, a weapon designed to split worlds apart from the core. If the Vorlax could not consume Cathara, they would ensure nobody else could have it either. Massive energy surge from the primary hive vessel, Park shouted. "Captain, they are charging something big. Energy signatures are off the scale." Maria pulled up the analysis data and felt her blood run cold. She had heard of weapons like this, prohibited by every civilized species in the galaxy. If that device detonated, Cathara and everyone on it would be gone in minutes. There is a way to stop it, Maria said quietly, her mind racing through calculations. If we fly a ship directly into the weapon's power core and detonate our reactor at the right moment, the feedback will destroy the device before it can fire. Everyone on the bridge understood what she was not saying. It would be a one-way trip. Manual detonation required someone to stay with the ship until the last second. Whoever went would not come back. Plot the course, where Maria ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. I will pilot the ship myself. The rest of you prepare to evacuate. Captain, no, Park protested. That is an order, Lieutenant. But before anyone could move, the bridge door opened and 15 crew members filed in. Engineers, pilots, medical staff, people from every section of the ship. They stood at attention, their faces set with determination. Engineer David Okafor spoke for all of them. Captain, with all due respect, you do not get to have all the glory. We came here together. We finished this together. Maria Chen looked at the faces of her crew standing before her. These were not elite soldiers trained for suicide missions. They were ordinary people who had volunteered for a simple patrol assignment and ended up in the middle of a war. David Okafor was an engineer who wrote poetry in his spare time. Lieutenant Tanaka had a daughter waiting for her back on Earth. Marcus Webb, the young Marine who had fought on the surface, had just gotten engaged before shipping out. They were all prepared to die. You understand what this means? Maria asked, her voice rough with emotion she could no longer hide. There is no escape pod, no rescue. We go in. We detonate the reactor, and that is the end. We understand, Captain, David replied calmly. We also understand what happens if we do not. Every Cathari on that planet dies. Every life we have fought to save means nothing. So we finish what we started. Maria wanted to argue, to order them to safety, to take this burden on herself alone. But she knew her crew. She knew humans. Once they decided something was worth dying for, no force in the universe could change their minds. It was humanity's greatest strength and most terrible curse. All right, she said quietly. Everyone else evacuates to the coalition ships. Engineering team, prepare the reactor for overload. Helm, plot us a course directly into that hive ship's power core. We have one shot at this, so let us make it count. The Perseverance detached from the formation, its damaged hull straining as engines pushed it toward the massive Vorlax vessel. The other human ships and the newly arrived coalition forces provided covering fire, keeping the swarm's defenders occupied while the crippled frigate made its final approach. In the cockpit, Maria sat beside Lieutenant Sarah Park, who had refused to evacuate. You should not be here, Sarah, Maria said. Someone needs to keep you flying straight, Captain, Sarah replied with a small smile. Besides, my family is on New Shanghai Colony. If the Vorlax are not stopped here, they will move to other systems. Maybe mine. I do this for them. I do this so they never have to face this terror. Behind them, David worked frantically in engineering, bypassing safety systems and rigging the reactor for maximum yield. Beside him, Tanaka monitored weapon systems, ready to clear any obstacles in their path. All across the ship, the volunteer crew members took their positions, each one knowing they had minutes left to live. Captain, David's voice came over the communications. Reactor is ready. When you give the word, I will start the overload sequence. After that, we have 3 minutes before detonation. No going back. Maria looked at the tactical display. The Vorlax Doomsday weapon was charging rapidly. Analysis suggested it would fire in less than 10 minutes. They had to reach the power core and detonate before that happened, or Cathara was lost. Do it, Maria ordered. Start the sequence. The Perseverance shuddered as its reactor began the carefully controlled process of tearing itself apart. Alarms blared throughout the ship, warning of catastrophic danger. But the crew had already silenced their fear. They were beyond warnings now. On Cathara's surface, Ambassador Sheeran watched the human ship accelerate toward the hive vessel. She understood what she was seeing. She understood the sacrifice being made. Around her, Cathari civilians gathered, watching the sky, watching these aliens give their lives for a people they barely knew. Why? Murtaugh asked beside her, his voice breaking. Why would they do this? Sheeran thought of Captain Chen's words from days ago. She thought of Sergeant Rodriguez fighting in the streets. of the civilian ships that had come with improvised weapons, of every human who had looked at a dying world and decided that someone else's life was worth more than their own. Because they are human, Sheeran said simply, and humans do not abandon people. In the Coalition fleet, Admiral Croven watched the human ships approach with a warrior's respect. He had fought in dozens of battles, had seen courage and sacrifice countless times, but this was different. This was not soldiers following orders or warriors seeking glory. This was ordinary people choosing to die so strangers could live. All ships, Croven commanded, concentrate fire on the hive vessel's defenses. Clear a path for the Perseverance. We will not let their sacrifice be in vain. The Coalition vessels opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams and missiles converged on the Vorlax defenders, overwhelming their organic armor and creating a corridor through the chaos of battle. The Perseverance flew through that corridor like an arrow aimed at the heart of the beast. Inside the human ship, the crew gathered on the bridge for their final moments. The reactor countdown showed 2 minutes remaining. They could see the hive vessel's power core on the sensors now, a massive pulsing organ deep within the bioship that fed energy to the doomsday weapon. David looked around at his crewmates. These people he had served with for 3 years. Anyone want to say anything profound? Last words for the history books? Tell Earth we did good, Maria said quietly. Tell them we upheld the values they taught us. Tell them humanity kept its promise. Tell my daughter I love her, Tanaka added, tears streaming down her face. Tell her this mattered. Tell everyone that the Cathari were worth it, Sarah said. Every single one of them was worth it. Marcus Webb, the young Marine, laughed softly. Tell them humanity does not know how to quit. Even when we should. They held hands as the Perseverance punched through the final layer of the hive vessel's defenses and penetrated deep into its organic interior. The walls around them pulsed with alien life. The bioneural networks of the Vorlax swarm screaming warnings through their hive mind. But warnings came too late. 30 seconds, David announced. Reactor breach in 30 seconds. Maria opened one final communication channel, broadcasting to every ship in the system. This is Captain Maria Chen of the Perseverance. To the people of Kithara, you are not alone. You are not forgotten. Your lives matter. To the Coalition forces, thank you for standing with us. To Earth, tell our families we died as humans should, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And to the Vorlax swarm, learn this lesson well. Humanity does not run. Humanity does not surrender. And humanity never ever abandons people in need. The countdown reached 0. The explosion was visible from the surface of Cathara, a new sun born in the darkness of space. The Perseverance's reactor detonated with the force of a small star, the energy release tearing through the hive vessel's power core. The feedback cascade destroyed the doomsday weapon, ripped apart the massive bioship, and sent shockwaves through the Vorlax neural network. For just a moment, every Vorlax creature in the system felt something they had never experienced before. Pain, fear, loss. The hive mind, always so confident in its superiority, recoiled from the agony of having a piece of itself torn away so violently. And then the remaining Vorlax began to retreat. Without their flagship, without their ultimate weapon, facing unified resistance from multiple species, the swarm calculated that continued engagement was no longer viable. The bioships turned and fled into deep space, leaving Cathara behind. The battle was over. The planet was saved, and 5 humans had paid the ultimate price to make it happen. In the command center on Cathara, the room fell silent as the Cathari processed what had happened. They had survived. Against impossible odds, against the Vorlax swarm that had destroyed 43 civilizations, they had survived. Because humans had decided they were worth saving. Sheeran stood and walked to the window, looking up at the sky where the Perseverance had died. Around her, every Cathari in the command center stood as well, their bodies resonating with a harmonic of mourning and gratitude so powerful it made the building's walls vibrate. They saved us, Murtaugh said, his voice barely a whisper. They came from across the stars, knowing they would die, and they saved us anyway. Remember their names, Sheeran said, her voice carrying to everyone in the room. Captain Maria Chen, Lieutenant Sarah Park, Engineer David Okafor, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, Private Marcus Webb, remember all of them. Remember every human who came here. They gave us more than our lives. They gave us hope. They gave us proof that the universe is not as cold and cruel as we feared. Outside, across the planet, millions of Cathari looked to the stars and sang. It was a song of mourning, of gratitude, of love for people they would never meet. It was a song that resonated across communication channels and reached the coalition fleet still in orbit. Admiral Croven listened to that song and felt something shift inside his warrior's heart. "My people have fought for honor for thousands of years," he said to his crew. "Today I learned that there is something greater than honor. There is compassion. There is sacrifice not for glory, but simply because it is right. The humans have taught us this lesson. We must not forget it." Around the galaxy, billions watched the aftermath of the Battle of Cathara. They had seen everything. They had watched humans fight impossible odds. They had witnessed ordinary people become heroes. They had seen 5 souls give everything so that millions might live. The galaxy would never be the same. 3 months after the Battle of Cathara, Ambassador Shirin stood before a monument that had never existed in her people's history. The Cathari had always built memorials for their own fallen, elegant structures of crystal that sang in the wind. But this monument was different. This one honored those who were not Cathari, who had no connection to their world except the choice to save it. The memorial was a collaboration between human and Cathari artists. Crystalline structures intertwined with stone brought from Earth, creating something that belonged to both species and neither. Inscribed on its base were 847 names, every human who had died defending Cathara. Captain Maria Chen's name was at the top. Shirin touched the stone gently, feeling the coolness of earth granite under her crystalline fingers. Behind her, thousands of Cathari gathered for the dedication ceremony. Among them stood humans, visitors from Earth who had come to see where their friends and family had fallen. There were also Kixtal warriors, Tilani diplomats, Genkar merchants, and representatives from 24 other species. The galaxy had come to remember. 3 months ago we sent out a call for help, Shirin began, her voice amplified across the plaza. 17 species heard us. 17 species refused. We accepted our death because we believed that was how the universe worked. The strong survived, the weak perished, and nobody risked themselves for strangers. She paused, looking at the human delegation. Then humanity proved us wrong. They came when no one else would. They fought when victory was impossible. They died so we could live. And in doing so, they reminded the galaxy of something we had forgotten. Compassion is not weakness. Helping others is not foolishness. These are the things that make civilization worth saving. Among the human delegation stood Lieutenant Sarah Chen, younger sister of Captain Maria Chen. She wore her sister's old service jacket, the fabric patched and worn. When Shirin invited her to speak, Sarah approached the monument with quiet dignity. "My sister used to tell me that humanity's greatest strength was not our technology or our weapons," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "She said it was our memory. We remember when we were alone and afraid. We remember when we nearly destroyed ourselves. We remember every time someone helped us and every time no one did." She placed a hand on her sister's name carved into the stone. Maria remembered. Everyone here remembered, and they decided that no one else should feel that abandonment, not if they could prevent it. The ceremony continued with speeches from various dignitaries and survivors, but the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. Kelvin, the young Cathari who had fought beside Sergeant Rodriguez, stepped forward with a group of his peers. They were all young, all civilians who had watched their world nearly die and had watched humans save it. "We are the first generation of Cathari who know how to fight," Kelvin said. "Sergeant Ana Rodriguez taught us that peace is not the absence of violence. It is the willingness to stand against violence when necessary. She is alive because her wounds were not fatal, but many of her friends are not. We dedicate ourselves to their memory. We will learn to defend ourselves so that humanity never has to die for us again. But more than that, we will learn to defend others. When the galaxy cries out for help, we will answer, just as humans answered for us." That promise was already being fulfilled across Cathara. Human military advisors worked with newly formed Cathari defense forces, teaching them tactics and strategy. Not to make them warriors like the Kixtal, but to give them the tools to protect themselves. The Cathari learned quickly, their natural harmony making them excellent at coordinated operations once they overcame their aversion to conflict. But the changes extended far beyond Cathara. In the Galactic Coalition Assembly, The aftermath of the battle had created political earthquakes. The fact that humanity, a species classified as primitive and developing, had achieved what the coalition deemed impossible could not be ignored. More importantly, the public response across coalition worlds could not be suppressed. Young people from dozens species protested in the streets, demanding their governments adopt what they called the human doctrine. They argued that the coalition had a moral obligation to protect vulnerable species from existential threats, regardless of strategic value. The old guard resisted, citing pragmatism and resource limitations. But the cultural shift was undeniable. The Galactic Coalition extended a formal invitation for Earth to join as a full member. Ambassador Chen, Sarah's new posting, stood before the assembly to accept on humanity's behalf. But she did so with conditions that made the traditional diplomats uncomfortable. Earth will join the coalition, Sarah announced, but we do so with the expectation that this body will honor the sacrifice my sister and her crew made. We demand a formal mutual defense pact. No more watching worlds burn while we calculate strategic value. No more abandoning civilizations because helping them is inconvenient. The Kethara Accords must be ratified. Every species in this coalition commits to rapid response when any world faces existential threat. The debate lasted for weeks. Conservative factions argued it was too expensive, too risky, too likely to drag them into conflicts that could be avoided. But they were fighting against momentum they could not stop. The Battle of Kethara had become a symbol, a rallying cry for a generation that believed the galaxy could be better than it was. The Kethara Accords passed with significant support. A rapid response force was established, jointly commanded by human Kixtal and Kethari officers. It was far from perfect, plagued by political compromises and limited resources. But it existed, and that was something. Admiral Croven took command of the military component, with specific authority to respond to distress calls without waiting for assembly approval. When asked why he accepted such a controversial position, his answer was simple. I watched humans die for people they did not know. I will not dishonor their sacrifice by doing less. On Kethara, the recovery continued. Earth sent engineers, medical personnel, agricultural specialists, and teachers. Not conquerors or colonizers, just people willing to help rebuild. The Kethari cities slowly rose from ruins, incorporating both their traditional crystal architecture and new defensive structures designed to withstand future attacks. Sergeant Ana Rodriguez stayed on Kethara, training the defense forces and recovering from her wounds. She walked with a limp now, a permanent reminder of the battle in the streets. Kelvin became her assistant, translating not just language but cultural context as humans and Kethari learned to work together. Do you regret it? Kelvin asked her one day as they watched recruits practice tactical maneuvers. Coming here fighting for us, nearly dying? Ana was quiet for a moment, watching the young Kethari learn to handle weapons they had never imagined needing. No, she said finally. We lost good people, friends. That pain will never go away. But regret? No, we did what needed to be done. We saved lives. We made a difference. That is what humanity does. That is who we choose to be. The story of Kethara spread throughout the galaxy like a virus, infecting every conversation about morality, duty, and civilization's purpose. No one arrived to save us except humans became a common phrase, sometimes spoken with gratitude, sometimes with shame, but always with recognition of what it meant. Young people from dozens of species volunteered for the Rapid Response Force, inspired by humanity's example. They trained alongside humans, learning not just tactics but philosophy, how to balance compassion with necessity, how to fight without hatred, how to risk everything for people you had never met. Not everyone approved. Some species viewed humans as dangerous idealists who would drag the galaxy into endless conflicts. Others feared that human influence would destabilize the careful political balance that had maintained peace for centuries. There were calls to limit human expansion, to contain their influence, to prevent them from spreading their reckless altruism. But there were also millions who looked at humanity and saw something they wanted to be. They saw a species that had crawled out of self-destruction and decided to be better. They saw people who remembered suffering and refused to inflict it on others. They saw the possibility that the galaxy could be more than a collection of civilizations, protecting their own interests. 5 years after the Battle of Kethara, a new distress call came in. A mining colony on the edge of Coalition space was under attack by pirates. It was not an existential threat, not a planet-killing crisis, just ordinary people in danger. The old Coalition would have debated response protocols for weeks while the situation resolved itself one way or another. The Rapid Response Force launched within hours. 3 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the colony. 1 human frigate, 1 Kickstall destroyer, and 1 Kithari support vessel. They drove off the pirates with minimal casualties and provided aid to the wounded colonists. The colony's governor, an elderly Genkar merchant, approached the human commander with tears in his eyes. When we sent the distress call, I did not expect anyone to come. The Coalition does not usually care about places like this. Why did you come? The commander, a young woman who had grown up hearing stories of the Battle of Kithara, smiled.